Welcome to chapter 25 and Things Fall Apart. This is the last chapter, so this is going to wrap up our novel for us, and we're going to find out what happens after Congo killed the court messenger in chapter 24. When the district commissioner arrived at Congo's compound at the head of an armed band of soldiers and court messengers, he found a small crowd of men sitting wearily in the obi. He commanded them to come outside, and they obeyed without a murmur. So notice, he shows up and starts commanding people to do things. And they obey without even a murmur because they know that this guy's in charge. The white guy. They hadn't even seen a white guy through most of the entire novel. And now the white guy shows up and he's in charge. So it lets you know a whole lot about the situation. "Which among you is called a Congo?" he asked through his interpreter. "He is not here," replied Ericka. "Where is he?" "He is not here." The commissioner became angry and red in the face. He warned the men that unless they produced a Congo forthwith, he would lock them all up. The men murmured among themselves, and Ericka spoke again. "We can take you where he is, and perhaps your men will help us." The commissioner did not understand what Ericka meant when he said, "Perhaps your men will help us." One of the most infuriating habits of these people was their love of superfluous words, he thought. So superfluous is like unnecessary or unnecessarily extra. So the district commissioner here doesn't understand the Igbo customs, doesn't really care to understand or try to empathize with these people. He sees them as being beneath him, as being savage, and being really kind of stupid and primitive. So this district commissioner is the most offensive person in the book. I know that some of you may argue that a Congo is pretty offensive, and he is, but to me, for my money, the district commissioner is one of the most offensive people in all of literature, and if I could dive into this book and put my hands on the district commissioner, he would be in a lot of trouble. So keep that in mind, that this district commissioner is not a good guy. Ericka with 5 or 6 others led the way. The commissioner and his men followed, their firearms held at the ready. He warned Ericka that if he and his men played any monkey tricks, they would be shot, and so they went. There was a small bush behind Congo's compound. The only opening into this bush from the compound was a little round hole in the red earth wall through which fowls went in and out in their endless search for food. The hole would not let a man pass through. It was to this bush that Ericka led the commissioner and his men. They skirted round the compound, keeping close to the wall. The only sound they made was with their feet as they crushed dry leaves. Then they came to the tree from which Congo's body was dangling, and they stopped dead. "Perhaps your men can help us bring him down and bury him," said Ericka. "We have sent for strangers from another village to do it for us, but they may be a long time coming." So Congo has killed himself. He's hung himself. The district commissioner changed instantaneously. The resolute administrator in him gave way to the student of primitive customs. So now this guy who fancies himself sort of a scholar of these primitive customs thinks, oh, here's an opportunity for me to learn something about their culture. But it's not really so much that he wants to learn about it as he wants to kind of assure himself that his culture is better by comparison. "Why can't you take him down yourselves?" he asked. "It is against our custom," said one of the men. "It is an abomination for a man to take his own life. It is an offense against the earth, and a man who commits it will not be buried by his clansmen. His body is evil, and only strangers may touch it. That is why we ask your people to bring him down, because you are strangers." "Will you bury him like any other man?" asked the commissioner. "We cannot bury him. Only strangers can. We shall pay your men to do it. When he has been buried, we will then do our duty by him. We shall make sacrifices to cleanse the desecrated land." Ericka, who had been gazing steadily at his friend's dangling body, turned suddenly to the district commissioner and said ferociously, "That man was one of the greatest men in Umuafia. You drove him to kill himself, and now he will be buried like a dog." He could not say any more. His voice trembled and choked his words. "Shut up," shouted one of the messengers quite unnecessarily. "Take down the body," the commissioner ordered his chief messenger, "and bring it and all these people to the court." "Yes, sir," the messenger said, saluting. The commissioner went away, taking 3 or 4 of the soldiers with him. In the many years in which he had toiled to bring civilization to different parts of Africa, he had learned a number of things. One of them was that a district commissioner must never attend to such undignified details as cutting a hanged man from a tree. Such attention would give the natives a poor opinion of him. In the book which he planned to write, he would stress that point. As he walked back to the court, he thought about that book. Every day brought him some new material. The story of this man who had killed a messenger and hanged himself would make interesting reading. One could almost write a whole chapter on him. Perhaps not a whole chapter, but a reasonable paragraph at any rate. There was so much else to include, and one must be firm in cutting out details. He had already chosen the title of the book after much thought: "The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger." And that is the end of Things Fall Apart. That last passage frustrates me more than anything in this book, and it really ticks me off every single time I read this. Because the district commissioner, and this is the genius of Chinua Achebe, the way that he writes the district commissioner, to really reflect the attitudes of the Europeans toward the Africans whom they basically showed up and then conquered, thinking that they were better than them. So he mentions that this district commissioner has toiled to bring civilization to parts of Africa. But we read all about how civilized they are. They have a court system, they have many things put in place in their society that make them civilized. I mean, these are not people who were savages in the jungle, no matter what the district commissioner thinks. And then the other irony, really, of what this guy says is, oh, this guy that just hung himself might make an interesting chapter for a book. Well, maybe not a whole chapter, but at least a really good paragraph. So it's ironic because we have all of this entire book about Okonkwo, and this district commissioner can't see all of this stuff. He only sees this dead guy hanging in a tree. He doesn't understand that this man's life had value and meaning and purpose to it. He only sees the shell, basically. So, and the other thing that's offensive here is the title of this guy's book. He says it's the pacification of primitive tribes. And then the lower Niger part just explains the setting, essentially, the Niger River. And then Nigeria is below that, or south of that. So the first part, pacification, meaning that he had to calm these wild savages down, like they were out of control and they needed to be pacified. And then he calls them primitive. But they're not primitive at all. I mean, they have communication techniques that resemble Morse code. They have their judge and jury. They have sophisticated ways for dealing with aspects of their culture that the district commissioner doesn't even get, which is why it's a joke when he calls himself this student of primitive customs. You know, he's not much of a student. He's missing everything. So, in any case, that's the end of Things Fall Apart. I hope that you enjoyed it at least a little bit. It is one of my favorite stories of all time, and it is one of the best books I think ever written. So, we'll talk about it in class. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thanks.